Good afternoon. Are y'all enjoying your leadership conference so far today? Great. So my name is David Money. I'm a previous employee of TDEC. I used to work for the Drinking Water Program, retired there after 30 years. Um, I've been working with TAUD now for 2 years as a trainer and technical assistance provider. They've asked me to talk to you about, let me turn this down just a little, getting too close to you. To talk to you about your favorite subject, right? The lead and copper rule. Just remember this. I'm just the messenger, right? If you want to shoot at me, that's fine. Just don't shoot me. Uh, but feel free to lob some questions or whatever towards me. But this is probably let me turn it down just a little bit. You see it? Let's try this. I'm a little deaf, so I talk loud. So that's probably contributing. But this rule is probably, in my career, I've had more negative comments about this rule than any other one. And I understand utilities' concerns about it. But anyway, so let's just talk about the lead and copper rule a little bit. And I want to kind of start with a background on why, because I hear people all the time, why do we have to do this? It's not our water, it's the customer's water, right? That's the number one complaint I hear. Well, a little background on why EPA is addressing this. You all probably understand that lead is not good for us, correct? We all agree with that, and it's exceptionally bad for children and neurological development in our young children. The science is clear. Uh, we know there are many sources of lead in our environment, leaded gasolines, leaded paints, and we certainly, have regulations that are beginning to address those, and as well as drinking water. EPA is estimating that there are over 9 million homes that either have lead pipes in the premise plumbing, lead material in the premise plumbing, or lead service lines. So this is why one of the main drivers for these regulations. Okay, we've not been in the regulation of lead in drinking water very long. Uh, the first lead and copper rule was 1991. We had subsequent revisions in 2001, 2007. And then there was a long period of no regulation. No new regulations. EPA proposed the LCRR, which was the lead and copper rule revision in 2021. That rule became final on October 16th, 2024, or you had to comply with it on October 16th, 2024. EPA understood that there needed to be other revisions to that regulation. And so they immediately began working on another regulation called the Lead and Copper Rule Improvements, which is the rule we're going to talk about today primarily. That rule was published, or proposed rules published in November 2023. EPA announced that the final rule on October 8th, which was just a couple of weeks ago. The compliance date for you for that rule is 3 years after publishing. So it is expected that EPA will publish that final rule in the Federal Register either today or tomorrow. So basically, for the LCRI, you guys are going to have to comply with it around October 2027 with the full rule. Now, there are certain provisions in the LCRR that you have to comply with in the interim, and we'll talk about that in just a minute. So really what you've got is you got an extra 3 years. to comply fully with the new lead and copper regulations. One of the weird things that's happened because of the timing of these two regulations is TDAC did not have time could not meet the primacy application provisions in the regulation. They would have had to done two rulemaking, one would counteract the other one. So EPA applied for, TDAC applied for, EPA granted a primacy extension. So there's going to be a period of time essentially between now and when TDAC obtains primacy, which will probably be sometime in 26.
That way it'll help.
Yeah, so I will back up. The problem is I can't see the screen, so I don't know what I'm talking about. Maybe we could just turn the volume down a little bit. I would like to turn the volume down. I don't know how to do it. I don't see a button on here. Maybe this is it. How's that? Is that better? I think I found the volume control. Is that better? Sorry. There we go. So anyway, also, since you guys got out early before Nick told me that we could keep you late today, so I'll keep you over. So anyways, what's going to happen is that try one more time, and I'm going to go for the microphone. So in this interim period, TDAC does not have primary enforcement authority, but EPA will. So they're going to be the primacy agency in this interim period. But as part of that agreement, TDAC has agreed to implement certain provisions of the regulation. Basically, they're collecting the data from you, reporting violations to EPA, et cetera, et cetera. If you incur any violations of these new regulations before TDAC has primacy, you will be dealing directly with EPA from an enforcement standpoint. So most of you understand the primary focus of the new regulations, which is the lead service lines, right? Everybody understand that? Well, if you don't, I'm just going to show you really quick so that everybody, if you're not familiar, this is a depiction of a typical service line and from the private side and the public side. This is the utilities water main. This is a line that conveys water from the main to the meter. This is typically owned by the utility. This part over here, this blue part from the curb stop valve or the meter, is the customer's line. Okay, so what this rule compelled you to do was to list every single connection that you have and identify the material here and identify the material here. That was the big push on the LCRR. That was the big lift that we had to meet by October 16th. Congratulations. TDAC told me that they received 100% of the lead service line inventories on time. So kudos to you guys. Y'all did it. I was informed that 40 came in at the last second. So, and just in the nick of time. But basically, you guys had to submit this inventory. You had to categorize the material of both sides of those service lines in one of those four categories: lead, not lead, lead status unknown, or galvanized requiring replacement. You have to make those inventories available to the public if they want to see them. If you serve more than 50,000 people, you've got to make it available online. you have to make a note in your CCR about its availability. You have to update that inventory annually to reflect any removals or verifications, etc. The next big lift for you, if you've completed your inventory and you have galvanized requiring replacement or lead or unknowns, you have to notify those customers. There's specific language that you have to use about health effects of lead. That is required to be submitted to those customers and a certification to TDAC no later than November 15th. That's coming up very quickly. TDAC has templates for you to utilize. EPA has templates for you to utilize. TDAC calls it the plurn. And then the other, so these are basically the things that you have to do in this interim period for LCR, between LCRR and LCRI. If you have an action-led exceedance, you have to provide Tier 1 public notice. So let's just kind of give you a real quick recap. And I think this is the same, the next few slides are basically the same thing. The things that were in the regulation that you had to do that bridge the gap between LCRR and LCRI, and that was develop that inventory, make the inventory available to the public, provide notification of those customers about the materials that they have, and do that annually. Again, Tier 1 public notice for an action level exceedance. This is going to be extremely important for you guys to understand the ramifications of exceeding the action level. And the action level is not 15 anymore. After 2027, it's going to be 10. Okay? So that's the part we're going to bridge us into LCRI. So what are the final requirements of LCRI? Here are the key categories that EPA is addressing right here. Achieving lead removal within 10 years. That's in the regulation. Improving tap sampling. There's requirements for wide mouth bottles, certain language that you communicate to the customers. First and fifth liter sampling for lead service lines. Strengthening protections to reduce exposure. Sampling lead in schools and daycare facilities. Locating legacy pipes with the service line inventory. Lowering that lead action level to 10 parts per billion, and increase transparency and communication to customers. So those are the main categories that the rule covers. We'll go into a little bit of the specifics. Just want to say this. The actual regulation, if you look at the whole LCRI plus the preamble, it's over 800 pages. The rule itself is about 170. Okay, that's what this is just the rule itself, not the preamble to it. These are fact sheets from EPA. These are really handy if you want to learn more about the details. And I can't go into all the details. It's just too much information. I'm going to cover high level stuff. I'd recommend you download these little quick fact sheets. It kind of summarizes what's going on with the regulation. But here are the major changes right here. And the very first thing I want to tell you is, so well applauded. Yeah, we did great. We pat ourselves on the back. We did the service line inventory, got it done, right? Guess what? We get to do another one. I didn't hear anything. No applause on that one. Okay. So it's not another one, but it's a modification to the existing one. They're calling this one the baseline. So you did the initial, and now we're going to do the baseline. If that makes sense. So that's going to, the baseline inventory, that's going to collect connector information, which we didn't get during the first round. Baseline inventory. There's going to be a validation for non-lead status service connections. We'll have 7 years to get that done. A requirement to identify all unknowns and remove all lead and galvanized requiring replacement, 10 years. That revised action level of 10 parts per billion. Service line replacement plans, if you have lead, galvanized, or unknowns, new tier designations, new places to sample, revised sample siting plans, corrosion control treatment changes, tap sampling procedures, public education, transparency, distribution site assessment samples for any sample that's above 10 parts per billion. Before we called it, the previous rule called it find and fix. They've changed the title. Sampling of lead in schools and child care facilities. You may hear TDEC say, don't worry about it. Department of Education does that. That's not true. They're misinformed. The regulation says you will do it. And we'll talk more details about that. CCR reporting changes. So let's talk about the baseline inventory. Right? So we did the first inventory. Now we need to start working on the second one. So I told you about these things that you have to do between 2024 and 2027, right? Well, beginning in 2027, you've got to submit this inventory. So you got 3 years to start working on this. Essentially, you have to identify the connector material. So what are we talking about connectors? No, we're talking about flexible material that connects the main to a rigid service line. So typically you may have heard them called lead goosenecks, right? Or sometimes they're used copper, or you may not have one at all, and that's fine. But you have to identify every one of those service connections in your inventory, and we're going to need to add another column for connectors. And we're going to need to identify each service line with regard to one of those 4 categories. You're going to call it lead. It used to be lead, but we replaced it. If you know, it's never been lead. I don't know, or there is no connector present. Okay, so these are the 4 categories for the connectors on the new baseline inventory that's required to be submitted in 3 years. That's your next big lift. One of the big lifts. And of course, same thing, you got to update that thing annually, make notifications to your customers about the materials, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. If you have unknowns, you're going to have 10 years to basically identify or replace. So basically, if it's an unknown, it's going to be on your replacement list. And then when you go to replace it, it will no longer be an unknown because you'll identify it, if that makes sense. So this is how EPA defines connectors. Also referred to as gooseneck, pigtail, means a short segment of piping not exceeding 3 feet that can be bent and used in connection between service piping, typically connecting the service line to the main. And typically that's going to be located right here. So the criteria that you use to make these determinations is basically the same criteria that you use for the original inventory, which is records review. So you're going to be looking at all your construction records, your historical records, et cetera, and you'll make those determinations. So did anybody, well, let me back up. Validation of not lead status. So on your inventory that you submitted, and you will submit, if you list not lead as a description of the material, there's going to be a validation requirement. So basically, anything that was not determined to be not lead from something other than a record or a visual inspection of 2 points goes into a validation pool. Make sure I get this right so you understand it. If you said it was not lead based on a record, it's not in the pool. If you said it's not lead based on a 2-point inspection, it's not in the pool. Everything else goes in the pool that's classified as not lead. So basically, it's going to be limited to lines that you classified as not lead where you've only done a 1-point inspection. Those go into the pool. From that pool, you're going to have to go back and validate a certain percentage. That percentage ranges from 0.7 to 20% in that area of the pool. So, for example, if you had less than 1,500, you do 20% of the pool. You'd go back and validate them. And when they say validate them, that means you're going to go back and do a 2-point visual inspection, right? So if you said it was not lead because you looked in the meter box and you did a 1-point and saw that it was PVC, you got, and that's in your pool, and that's one of the sites you're going to go validate, you have to go back and either dig or go to the other end of the line of the customer's house. And that's the second point. Does that make sense? So 2-point visual inspection is required for validation for a percentage of the ones that are classified as not lead. Oh, they also use some language in the rule that says randomly selected a percentage. So it says lottery, it uses the term lottery style. I don't know what that means. I guess it's you got a random number generator or something. I don't know how it works. Lottery balls, I don't know. So that has to be done within 10 years of the final rule publication, or it's approximately 34. Yes, sir. Both, both, both sides of the service line. If you said, if the question was, are we talking about the homeowner service line? Yes. Are we talking about the utility service line? Yes. Yes. All right. So validation, that has to be completed by within 7 years of the rule publication, not the effective date. This is going to be 2034. Replacing all lead galvanized requiring replacement lines within 10 years, approximately 2037, when that's going to happen. So that takes effect when the rule is effective for you, which is probably going to be November 2027. So 10 years would be 2037. So yeah, so here we go. I knew this is coming. Don's going to help me out. No. Yes, they can't force you to do it, but there's so many sticks that you'll want to do it. You'll get tired of getting beat up. You'll want to get it done, if that makes sense. Okay. That's right, it does. Okay. Right. And so we're gonna talk about that in just a minute. Yep. The question is, the question is, do we have to replace the private service lines? We don't have authority to do that. And the answer is the rule would compel you to try to do it. And there's a lot of sticks and not very many carrots. Okay? And we're going to talk about those too. So what the rule says is that you got to replace all your service lines, lead, galvanized requiring replacements, unknowns within 10 years, and you have to uh, uh, have a replace it at a pace of approximately 10% per year. If there is a provision for an extension for utilities that have an exorbitant amount, basically 3.9, if your replacement rate is going to be 3.9% of all your lines per year, then you can ask for an extension on it. So for very large systems, they can get an extension past the 10-year period to do it. So I'll get to your point. I'll get to the question in just a minute. Let me get through this slide. So when you replace those, you have to do a couple things. You have to provide that customer with a point of use or a pitcher filter that's certified to remove lead. They have to have 6 months worth of filters. And you have to offer to sample that customer's service for lead within 3 to 6 months after the replacement. Okay, so other parts of the rule says only except for certain conditions, emergency conditions or normal construction activities or whatever, only full service line replacements are allowed. Does that make sense? So when they say full versus partial, full means if you had both sides were lead, a full service line replacement would be replacing the utility side and the customer side. That's a full service line replacement. If yours was lead, your customer's is lead, and you can't have access to it, you're not supposed to replace yours. Does that make sense? Now you see where we're going with the, they can't make you replace the customer side, but if you don't, then you'll never be able to replace yours. And so you're going to be hanging out there forever with 2 lead service lines. And you're going to be doing those notifications forever. But there is a solution. That's an emergency. That's different. I said there are some exceptions, emergency repairs, etc. That's an exception, but planned replacements has to be full. Okay. Now, if the customer side has PVC and yours is lead, you replace yours, that's a full service line replacement, or vice versa, right? Okay. So this gets to your question. What is under your control? The rule says you will replace the ones that are under control of the water system. And they go on to further define that as if you have adequate access, example, legal access or physical access to conduct the full service line replacement. If you don't, you have to identify, well, let me back up. If there's some prohibition, and there is in Tennessee, and I've put this citation on this slide, you are required to cite that in your plans. You have to make a reasonable effort to obtain property owner consent. So in Tennessee, you're not allowed to work on that side, but there is a provision that says unless you can't work on their side unless they give you permission. Okay, so that's what we're talking about, you getting consent or permission here. So you would have to get your customers' consent for you to work on their side of the line. And it says that you will be required to make a minimum of 4 attempts to engage the customer using at least 2 different methods to obtain that consent. And if you don't, then you stop. And then both service lines just sit there forever. And you continue to provide the customer that information about you need to replace your service line, et cetera.
So in my opinion, that's a foolish stalemate to get into.
It is.
That not then compel these board members to adopt a policy that says if a customer is unwilling and refuses to follow up on a known lead existing line, wouldn't you just act a policy that says you give them 60 days to comply or you'll cease that service? They'd have the authority to adopt that
Ooh.
policy.
That would be a good question for your attorneys. And I'm not an attorney.
Federal law versus state law.
Yeah. So, the reality is, my guess is if you have lead service lines out there, most of your customers are going to be agreeable to getting the things removed. They'll want them removed once they understand the dangers of it. There are probably some that don't, and that's okay. Anyway, so that's what the rule says about replacing lead service lines and what's under your control. Yes.
when you're saying customer service line, what if the lead line goes under their house and is part of their plumbing under their house?
No, the service line basically is defined as, the customer service line is from the meter to the customer's house,
Just to the
yeah, basically, to the foundation, yeah. So, here's a part of the new regulation that I totally disagree with. You may have heard me say this before, but they're elevating a ninth percentile action level exceedance. They're elevating that to a tier 1 public notice. That public notice is typically reserved for scenarios or situations where there is something terribly wrong with the water. There's some information that needs to be conveyed to the customer in an expedient manner, right? Tier 1, 24-hour public notice, radio, TV, everything you can do to get the information to the people. But anyway, so the new rule requires it, and you're currently subject to that today. So if you had an action level exceedance today of the current standard of 15 parts per billion, it's a tier 1 24-hour public notice. Additionally, regarding public notice and information, if you exceed the action level, you have to provide public education outreach no later than 60 days after the end of the monitoring period. I'm not going into all the details. If anybody's ever had to do it, you know that it's talking to the health department, doing community workshops, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a lot of public education that goes on if you exceed the action level. You have to revert back to standard monitoring. That's once every 6 months. You have to evaluate your corrosion control treatment. Either if you're not providing it, install it, or if you are providing it, reoptimize. If you exceed the action level 3 times in any 5-year period, you have to provide filters, carbon filters, point of use filters to every single one of your customers. Y'all hear me? If you exceed the action level 3 times in 5 years, you're going to give every one of your customers carbon filters, and you're going to test every single customer if they want you to. It's about to get serious, folks. And so at the end of this, I'm going to make some recommendations, and I'm really going to be talking about concentrating on looking at your corrosion control treatment activities and making sure that you're optimized, making sure that you don't exceed the action level, because we don't want to be there. If you have in your inventory listed materials that say that they are lead, galvanized, requiring replacement, or unknowns, you'll be required to develop a lead service line replacement plan. In that plan, that has to be submitted by October, we're assuming October, November 2027. Have to make it publicly available. You are going to be required to include a strategy to prioritize lead service lines, meaning we're going to focus on the most vulnerable populations, child care facilities, schools, disadvantaged communities. A strategy has to be included of how you're going to determine what your unknowns are and rectifying those. Procedures that you're going to follow to contact customers in advance of conducting the full lead service line replacements, notifying customers to flush their lines, customer outreach information, including the use of these picture filters, point of use filters, funding strategies that can help customers with their lead service line replacement, and again, the citation of a state or local law that affect your ability to conduct full lead service line replacements. And that's the citation that I showed you before. And if you want more information about that citation, Don Scholes did a really good job of summarizing everything yesterday or today. And so we have that available for you. So we've got new tiers as well. So if you remember, when you do your lead service, I'm sorry, when you do your lead and copper monitoring, EPA has developed a tiering system to indicate the risk level of certain kinds of materials, okay? So these have been revised and to include galvanized line, but basically the first two tiers remain the same. Single family structures with plumbing made of lead or served by lead service line buildings, or multifamily residences with plumbing of lead or served by lead service line. Number 3 and number 4 are going to be the two new ones that you're going to see. These are a little different. Tier 3, single family structures that are served by a lead connector or galvanized service line or premise plumbing that's ever downstream of lead. Single family structures with plumbing containing copper pipes and lead solder installed before the state's lead ban of July 1988. And then tier 5, which is everything else. So once you develop your service line inventory, the next step is going to be to look at the tier designations. Right? And there's if you're using TDEC spreadsheet, you'll notice there's a column on the far right side for that purpose. So you can go ahead and start looking at the tier designations, and most likely, most of you are probably going to have to redevelop your sample siting lists. They'll be different because the tiering system is different now. You have to develop a lead and copper sample siting plan. You've never had one before. You have a list of sites. This will be a real monitoring plan. Has to include the highest tier sites first. For example, if you've got to collect 20 samples, that's your number, and you've got 10 tier 1s. Well, you have to put those at the top of the list, and then you've got the next are tier 2s. You're going to put the next 20. So on and so on. You got to try to, you have to make sure that you're sampling at the highest risk sites that you've identified. So you have to reevaluate your plan based on your inventory and your updates periodically. So here's a good example. You have a sample siting plan and you're monitoring at tier 2 sites, and you've got a bunch of unknowns in your inventory, and over the course of those 10 years you rectify them and determine, oh my gosh, I've got 50 lead service lines. And guess what? Your sample sites are going to change. That's what it's saying. If you're doing water quality parameter monitoring, we'll talk about that in a moment, you have to include those in your plan. You have to specify that the sampling is going to utilize wide mouth bottles. There's special language that you have to provide to the customer that says things like, if the customer is going to collect the sample, don't clean the aerator, make sure that the water stays stagnant for 6 hours, etc. If you have lead service lines, there's a requirement to collect 1st and 5th liter samples. That means after a stagnation period of 6 hours, you draw the 1st liter, then you draw the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and 5th liter. You throw 2, 3, and 4 away, and you have 1 and 5 analyzed. The highest value of those two samples is utilized for compliance for that site. Compliance calculation, rather. If you have lead, if you have galvanized requiring replacement or unknowns, in October 2027, you will automatically be reverted back to standard monitoring, 2 6-month periods. So as you can see, it'd be very helpful for all of us when we get to 2027 to make sure we have no lead, no galvanized requiring replacements, and no unknowns, right? Yes. Distribution system and site assessment. So this was called find and fix. If within any sample that you collect that has a result that's greater than 10 parts per billion, you have to, within 5 days, collect a water quality parameter sample within a half mile of that site. It has to be in the same pressure zone, it has to be on the same main size, And if you're doing water quality parameter monitoring, that site has to be added to your list, to your plan. Within 30 days, you have to collect a follow-up sample at that site for lead. The rule says you can do additional sampling, first and fifth, sequential, whatever, to help identify plumbing contributions. These results are not used for compliance with the 9th percentile calculation. These are outside of it. However, if you don't do it, that's a violation. Step 3, within 60 days at the end of the period, you submit a report of your findings and recommendations for corrective actions if determined. Bottom line is, if you have a level that's above 10, what you're trying to do is go out to that site, collect water samples, and try to determine whether the elevated level is due to distribution water quality. Maybe it's the water treatment failure to provide optimized corrosion control treatment, or something else, or I don't know. And make that determination and report it back to the state. Basically, you're trying to find out what's causing the issue. Corrosion control treatment changes. You've probably heard this before. The new rule eliminates calcium carbonate equilibrium as a recognized corrosion control treatment. It specifies orthophosphate if a phosphate is being used for corrosion control treatment and corrosion control treatment studies. Basically, doesn't mean you can't use a polyphosphate, okay, or a blended product. What it means is if you get triggered into doing corrosion control treatment studies and the rule says you're going to evaluate the effect of 1 part per million and 3 parts per million phosphate, that has to be orthophosphate. It can't be, 75, 50 or 75, 25 product. It's got to be 100%. If you exceed the action level again, if you're not providing corrosion control treatment, you've got to install it. If you are, you've got to re-optimize it. Sampling at schools and daycare facilities. This excludes any school that's built after the second state's lead ban, which was July 2015. You have to develop a list of schools and child care facilities, provide communication about the risks of lead annually, beginning in October 2027, and you got to submit that list to the state. So I wouldn't worry about that till, late or mid 2027, because that's, the list could change. You're also required to do sampling of all elementary schools that meet that criteria and child care facilities one time during the first 5 years. That's going to be 2027, 2032. You have to do at least 20% a year, following the 3 T's sampling protocol, 5 samples per school, 2 samples per daycare facility. The rule specifically talks about locations to sample from, like kitchen taps, water fountains, etc. These results are not included in the 90th percentile calculation. You have to report them back to the facility, to TDEC, local and state health departments. The state has the authority to waive that requirement for the first 5-year sampling if the facility was tested under the WIN grant program after January 2021. They can also waive any subsequent monitoring requirements based on any equivalent programs. So encourage your systems to utilize WIN grant testing. Water quality parameters. So right now, only systems that serve 50,000 or greater, or somebody that exceeds the action level, is being required to do water quality parameter monitoring. That changes with the new regulation. All systems that serve 10,000 that are not providing corrosion control treatment have to do it. The number and entry point and distribution samples varies by population served. You have to monitor at least annually, initially 2 6-month monitoring periods, etc. So does everybody understand what water quality parameter monitoring is? Basically, it's monitoring at the entry point and then the distribution system to see what the water quality is with regard to corrosion control. Is the pH dropping out? Am I maintaining my phosphate levels, etc. Public education Revised health effects language in all customer notifications. This is new. Also, any tap results that you receive, any customer's tap results, you got to provide that result to that customer along with the language within 72 hours. So that's new. Again, these are going to be effective in 2027. Have those initial and annual notices to customers with lead, galvanized, and unknowns. The tier 1 public notice for the 9th percentile. For the 15 part per billion, that's until October 2027. After October 2027, it's 10 parts per billion. Increased transparency. We talked about the health effects language. A lot of CCR reporting now. Revised language, 9th percentile calculations, results, ranges of results, number of samples above 10 parts per billion, information on how to obtain copies of all results, information about your lead service line inventories, all that's got to be in your CCR. Talked about the tier 1 public notice, 72-hour notice for the value. So what do you need to be doing? Bottom line, we got about 15 minutes, right? So what do you need to be doing now? Between the LCRR and the LCRI for 24-27, that customer notice and delivery of certification. So anybody that's got lead, galvanized, or unknowns, you got to tell those customers by November 15th, and you got to certify to the state that you've done it. You need to start working on your baseline inventory now. You've got 3 years, but let's go ahead and get it knocked out, right? Start working on that. Continue to identify your unknowns. Don't wait. You've got 10 years to get it done, way out there. Let's get it knocked out now. If you have lead, galvanized, or unknowns, you might want to think about developing your lead service line replacement plan. That's got to be submitted in October 2027. Think about revising your LCR sample siting plan. It's got to be submitted in October 2027. Develop that list of child care and schools constructed prior to July 2015 and be ready to submit that. Other things, if you've not done this, you need to be thinking about doing these things. Engaging your customers and asking for assistance and helping you identify unknowns on their side. Eliminating as many of those lead, galvanized, and unknowns as soon as possible. Begin evaluating the verifications. The smaller the pool is, the less work you're going to have to do later on. Develop transparency provisions. If you don't have a website, get one. It's really helpful and useful. And I've been talking about this. We don't do enough monitoring in our distribution systems. I encourage you, please start looking at water quality throughout your distribution system. Conduct additional exploratory monitoring. Adopt goals for lead. The 10 parts per billion is going to be the new standard. So your goal should be something below that. Evaluate your corrosion control treatment that you're currently providing. What are your goals? What kind of treatment are you providing at the plant? Are you maintaining that water quality in the distribution system? Look at the worst areas of your distribution system. Look for degraded water quality. If you improve water quality in the worst place in your system, you just lifted the water quality everywhere in your system. And of course, if you're looking at optimizing corrosion control, if you make any treatment or chemical changes that might impact your optimal corrosion control treatment before you do it, please contact the state. Please make sure they're on board with it. There's a lot of money out there, and I think we may be talking about some funding in a minute. No? Okay. So there's a lot of money for lead and galvanized line replacement. It's coming through the bipartisan infrastructure law and the ARP, the American Rescue Plan. All that money primarily is being funded through the SRF and SWIG programs in Tennessee. So if you have funding questions, you need money for replacements, contact these folks and they'll help guide you to where you need to be. There's a lot of resources out there. This is the old service line inventory guidance. It's still got a lot of good information that I think could be helpful to you. The EPA has an LCRI site where you can download all these cool little fact sheets that are shortcuts to what the rule requires. TDEC's got a lead and copper rule site with the public notices and other information. Lead service line replacement collaborative, ASDWA, AWWA, and Blue Conduct. Those are all additional resources for you. So, you have any questions about lead and copper rule improvements or any questions? Yes, sir.
So we just continue to, since they extended it 2000, we just continue to monitor like we usually do.
Yep. So here's the question is, we're on a 3-year monitoring schedule. You don't change anything until 2027. Okay, you just keep doing what you've been doing with one exception. And that is, in the course of developing your inventory, if you discover that you've got high risk material like lead service lines that you didn't know you had, and that would compel you to look at revising your list in advance of the new rule.
Secondly, if we find any deadlines, we still have to prioritize galvanized.
If it is classified as so did y'all hear the question? If we don't have any lead lines, do we still have to prioritize galvanized replacement? And the answer is, if it is classified as galvanized requiring replacement, meaning it's a galvanized line that currently is or ever was downstream of another lead service line, it's going to be high risk, and yes, that would be prioritized. If it's just a galvanized line and it's never been downstream of lead, it's just a galvanized line. Yes.
I mean, where does that burden gonna lie? I know you said there's gonna be money available, but those pots of monies go very quickly. They're spread over all the states. What's that look like on the private side? Because do we take the ratepayer money to replace those lines? What's that gonna look like? I mean, or do you even know at this point?
So the question is, hey, there's a lot of lines out there and this money's being spread out among all the states. That money's going to go pretty fast, isn't it? Yeah, it is. Guess who's already gobbling it up? The systems that have lots of lead service line, MLG and W and Metro. So they're looking at it. You need to contact, but basically there are federal monies that are dedicated for that purpose. Contact SRF folks. They can help guide you through that. There's also funding resources and links on EPA's website. You can go there and look, and you can find different avenues for it.
If there's like really funding now, gotta get that time in place, like whose responsibility is it?
Public water. Well, I mean, it's a private line, right?
Say we hypothetically, utility went through, done an upgrade, replaced our service line, replaced the main line.
Right. So
Project,
right.
that line's set there.
right. So here's the thing. So you understand that the rule cannot compel you to pay for the customer's line, correct? And there's nothing in the rule that can pay you. That's why they're giving you the money. They're saying, hey, here's some money that you can use to replace the customer's line. So what happens is, if you don't have money or you don't want to spend the money to replace the customer's line, or you can't, then you don't replace it. And it just sits there.
What if you run into a situation, everything's replaced, say a school, they keep getting hits on their water. And we keep having to send them notifications that there are hits on the water. Who's responsible at that point? All the services new up in front of the building. Who's responsible if you go in the building and you take samples?
I think what he's asking is, should we factor that into our depreciation?
for that water. Like it's a water fountain that keeps getting,
Right. No, he's saying, hey, I got a school and we keep getting hits over there. What are we supposed to do with it?
place that we can work on.
Right. You can't work on their, you just advise them. Advise them, hey, you need to hire a plumber to come in and remove those brass cutoff valves that are connected to the copper at that water fountain that's causing that galvanic corrosion. That's what's causing your lead. It's not lead pipes.
Notice it until they fix it.
So I'm really confused here. You're saying you're sampling at a school?
If we did, like you said, you make these regulations.
Right.
pull these
Yeah.
samples,
Yeah. You sample the school, you send them the information, and you're done.
we're done.
You're done. Yes.
Got it.
Gotcha.
It's fine.
I'm sorry.
Got it.
All right. We got one more and we're done. Have any lead service lines been found in Tennessee? Yes. Yes. In places that you would not expect them.
Before you leave the room, and we'll come back here in 10 minutes, we'll start the last session.
So hear that? 10 minutes. 10 minutes, we're going to start again. Get your badges scanned.